Welcome to Generational Poverty, which is Module 4. You're going great. We're halfway there. So this module is probably one of my favourite modules to do when we are all together. The reason being it's quite controversial, and we usually have some incredibly rich and sometimes heated discussions around this topic. What I wanted to talk about on the offset is when we do have our Zoom chat, I think it's just really important to bear in mind that we all come from different backgrounds. And this presentation, which wasn't actually written by myself, it was written by one of our long-term volunteers who's been working in West Ulverstone for a long time and has been really influenced by the work of Ruby Payne. It is still written from a middle class perspective. So where most of us are from a middle class perspective of some description, and the content of this module is from a middle class perspective. So I just think it's really important that we name that up because our world is middle class. The way the news is presented is middle class. The way Centrelink handles things is middle class. And unfortunately, in some ways, this module is no different. However, the information within this module, we hope, will be very empowering, confronting, and really enlightening. So the other thing which is also important to name up is that Ruby Payne's work, she does The Bridges Out of Poverty, which is an actual book you can order. Her work is not scientifically proven. She hasn't. It's based on trends and patterns. It's not necessarily that this will apply to every single person who has a low socio status in the world. It's just watching trends and noticing similarities, and lots of teachers have applied Ruby Payne's work to schools and have had amazing success. So I think it's just a really important thing to consider while we go into this, that this is not necessarily a foolproof formula, but it is something that we've seen definitely within our mentees and the clients we work with. So I think a few things we can think about is sometimes there's a bit of a heated discussion around what is poverty. So poverty at times, I can remember my husband and I, when we went traveling, we went to Cambodia and then we went to India. And when we came back, my husband and a friend were having this big argument because my husband was saying the people that we saw in absolute poverty had no hope, they had no capacity to really strive outside of what they were within. But my friend, who was a health nurse at that stage, her argument was that people from generational poverty or from income-based poverty within Australia were as similarly stuck. And they sort of debated it back and forth, and it was quite entertaining to watch. But you will see that there are different definitions of poverty in your manual, which kind of touch on what I'm referring to now. So on page 48 of my manual, it talks about absolute poverty, relative poverty, and then income, and then basic needs. So have a read of that, and you'll see that there are different variations of poverty. The thing we're talking about today is socioeconomic status. So that's a phrase that is politically correct, which basically means poor or poor and uneducated. So socioeconomic status is a way of speaking about people from generational poverty without perhaps sounding as bad as saying generational poverty. There's a spectrum of generational poverty or of economic class, which you'll see we have down here. So generational poverty is the one in the blue, and then it kind of goes all the way across right up to generational wealth. So the interesting thing is that each sort of class, each social class has different rules. And I think that's the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway that you could possibly get from this module is there are different rules within each social class. And I think the little blue table there, sorry, the blue rectangle that has the little lightning bulb, that sort of describes what we're talking about the most articulately. So economic factors are a greater detriment of value and behavior than of culture. So depending on what your economic factors are, that's going to sort of determine your values and your behaviors, which is just fascinating. So people immigrating to a new country will relate better to people of the same class in a different culture than people of the same culture from a different socio-economic class. So that is just profound to think that I will relate better with someone in India who is middle class than I can relate to someone within my own culture who is like a lower class. It's just incredible. And you can really see what a challenge it is for us to go into mentoring with our eyes and hearts wide open, because we are not going to be speaking the same language. I can guarantee you of that. The way you see the world is not going to be how your mentee sees the world. And I think that it's a real cultural struggle in lots of ways. It is like being in another country. So I will just give you a little minute to have a look at the stats that we have there of Ulverston and Burnie. And I'd like you to read through those, and then we will continue after you've read. So hopefully from those statistics, you'll see that primarily a lot of the schools that we are working with are ranked as low socioeconomic. And I think I touched on the training before. The Northwest Coast especially has just a lot of need, very vulnerable communities. So hopefully you're starting to get an idea as to what generational poverty actually is in Australia. But if not, the official definition is when two or more generations have been born into what we would define as poverty. I can remember Alison Wishaw telling me a story that when she did a talk at Centrelink, they're saying that there are actually generations of fifth generations of generational poverty now. That they're seeing, so which is just incredible. So that could be 5 generations of never having paid work, 5 generations of receiving Centrelink benefits, 5 generations of generational poverty. So the kinds of things that people or cultures of generational poverty might go without obviously include financial, so money to buy goods and services. They will do without money. Emotionally, their capacity to choose and to control emotional responses is limited. So because there isn't that financial security, there's less capacity to choose and to control emotional responses, or even choose and control a lot of things. Mentally, they can do without the skills of being able to manage money and being able to have basic numeracy and literacy. They may do without some sort of belief in divine purpose and guidance. So because things are so fatalistic, there might be this sense that this just is the way it is and nothing can be done to change that. People or families from generational poverty may do without basic physical care, such as dental, going to the doctor, mobility. A friend of mine often talks about someone who lost their arm and they just lost their arm because having the capacity to go to a hospital, to be able to afford to get to the hospital, to make the appointments with the people to see the prosthetic limbs, to then follow through with subsequent appointments, it was just outside of the realm of possibility. So they just didn't have an arm. So incredibly resourceful. There's some other things which they may do without are friends, family, and backup in times of need. So support systems are often not there. And there isn't a great deal of nurturing mind, body, and soul. So generally life is about avoiding self-destructive behaviors, and if there is a self-destructive behavior, it's a continual cycle. Now, the biggest thing that I want to talk about in this little section is knowledge of hidden rules of middle class. So that is another thing that families from generational poverty have learned to do without. Now, when I talk about the hidden rules of middle class, we're going to unpack that a little bit in this training. But I just really quickly want to touch on the difference between situational poverty and generational poverty. So my family, as an example, my family when growing up, my mum came from a middle class family, or I guess you could say working class family. She went to art school and she was able to pick up low paying work doing things such as a kindergarten teacher's aide or a librarian assistant. And my dad, he came from a very middle class family, but when he was 4, he got polio, which meant that his schooling wasn't he wasn't able to attend formal schooling until he was very old, and I think he missed about 6 years of formal education. So because of that, his work opportunities were significantly limited. However, his family had enough resourcefulness and capacity to help grow him in areas that he was strong in. And in the end, he ended up being able to privately tutor people in guitar lessons because he was very musical. And while either of them didn't have a lot of money, they had enough resourcefulness to sort of scrape together to know how to apply themselves, which would be a rule of the middle class, in order to sort of get by, which would be very different from my neighbours who lived over the road from us. They lived in a housing commission house. Neither of their parents worked. Their diet was very basic. They would steal. There was just not a lot of hope for that family. So even though growing up we didn't look overly middle class, we still had strong middle class values, whereas our family over the road was probably more stuck in that generational poverty cycle and just did not understand how we did things, such as sitting down for a meal when we ate, or acknowledging that veggies and fruit were good to have, that sort of thing. So the hidden rules are unspoken cues and habits within a group. So one of the examples I like to make might be when you have met your husband or partner for the very first time, or even a friend, and they invite you back to their family's home, and all of their family are there, and you're the only person there who's not an insider. And in that case, you might feel a little bit unsure. You're not sure. You accidentally sit on the seat that's the head of the house's seat, or you don't know how to use all of this cutlery that's before you. You've forgotten which one is the dessert spoon and which one is the cake spoon. They might banter and tell some jokes that you have no idea what they're talking about, and you just have to sort of politely laugh. All sorts of things like that. You might be a very honest person, and if someone says something and you answer honestly, you might not know that in that family you don't be honest and you be nice. So if someone asks how your day was and you say, look, it was really terrible, I had an awful day, they might find that quite insulting or confronting. So that's just a very basic example of how hidden rules can just get you into trouble, and you don't even know you're breaking them until you can see someone's face, and clearly that was not the right thing to say. So it's a little bit like trying to play basketball using netball rules or trying to play volleyball using soccer rules. It just doesn't work. And no matter what you do, it is almost impossible to change your set of rules going from one class system to another. So thinking about that, I have this big table in your manual which goes over the different hidden rules among socioeconomic classes. And it truly is such a fascinating table. When you look at it, you can see that everybody has different values and everybody has different hierarchical systems. For me, I find the wealth one really fascinating because that is totally outside of my comfort zone. And I can only think of one or two people who have actually, I know, who come from this class system. And it's really fascinating to read how the other people live and the things that they place value on. Similarly, if you look at the middle class section, a lot of those things you will read them, and it is just there's such a resonance there. So, for example, driving forces would be work and achievement. And I know as a middle class person, schooling is really important, and good grades and good marks was really important. So, I think looking at the poverty tab for a second, it's really important to see where some of our rules are clashing with generational poverty. So, for example, conflicts and arguments are settled with a physical fight. That's just what is done. That might not be right or wrong, but it is just what is done. Um, Love and acceptance is based on whether the individual is liked. So, I mean, that is such a fickle thing to put your love and acceptance on, but at the same time, is achievement really that much better? So I think it's really a fascinating table, but I want to really focus on a couple of those. So possessions, um, the hidden rules among poverty or generational poverty, people are like possessions. So we generally, middle class people, tend to like nice things. We tend to accumulate materialistic goods, but in generational poverty, people are the most important thing, which is kind of lovely when you think about it like that. The fact that they place people over things is actually a really beautiful thing. However, some of the things can get them a little bit into strife. So for money, for middle class, money is to be managed, whereas for generational poverty, money is to be spent and to be used. Primarily, the reason is because if you don't spend it and use it today, chances are Johnny's going to be knocking on the door. People are such a priority. If Johnny wants my money, I'll give him my money. So also an incredible act of generosity, but also perhaps not as wise when you need to pay the electricity bill on Friday. So that's a bit of an indication as to some of the habits and traits that can be found in generational poverty. So I think have a look at that table. We'll pop you on pause, and then we might talk about some of the other characteristics of generational poverty. A couple of the key features from working with someone or a mentee from a background of generational poverty is thinking about a few little things. The other hidden rules, so the tab down the bottom, it talks a lot about how a child's demeanor you might find rude or confronting is really actually just their value and their culture system. So you can see that discipline is about penance and forgiveness, not change. So there is no desire to genuinely change because the notion of choice is incredibly foreign. So if you think about one of the key factors within generational poverty is hopelessness. So hopelessness it creates this cycle that continues from one generation to the next, which is I don't have a choice. And that I don't have a choice notion is so insidious. It enters into the person, and there is literally hardly any way of being able to see outside of the way they're living. Having a job is something that other people do. Going to year 10, that's something other people do. It's not something that I do. So if you can, in your mentoring, be an example of another way, that is a win as far as we're concerned. So there's no hope that life can actually be better because there never has been better. It's difficult to know that you should go and get a job when no one in your family has a job. When half of your family are in prison, there's the expectation that's probably where you go. It's just challenging this idea that people have been lazy or unmotivated, and that's the reason why they receive welfare payments. And really, it's about this notion of how could you possibly know to do otherwise if you hadn't ever been given the option? So I think that's just a really important thing to be aware of. This sense of hopelessness hasn't come from a manufacturing within, it's come from generations. And like I said, now it's fifth generation. So it's incredible. And I can remember a few stories around this. A friend of mine was working as a chaplain, and she was working with a student who couldn't justify why she would need to get a job, because when she was going to leave school, she was going to go on the dole, because that's what all her family had done. And the mentor, or the chaplain, actually sat down with her and said, well, if that's what you want, let's just do the numbers. So they worked out what the dole payment was for a fortnight, and then they worked out what a very low paying job would be at like Woolworths. And the student was just amazed when she saw how much more money she could get working at a supermarket rather than the dole. And it was kind of for her this light bulb moment of, oh my goodness, I could choose that. I could actually choose that option. So that was really profound moment. So I think understanding that people that are stuck in this generational cycle, they are used to this idea of I will survive from one pay to the next and I will get through. And the resourcefulness is astronomical, but it often comes at a cost. So, choices, choosing from one thing to another. So, choosing, do my kids get fed tonight or do we not have electricity? Well, how cold is it? Maybe it's spring, so maybe we'll pay the electricity next month, and this month we'll have tea every night. So it's survival mode, constant survival mode. The main focus is one issue or challenge at a time. And after that one has been overcome, there will be another one, because finances are everything. Having finances and managing money, if those things aren't out in sync, it infiltrates through everything. So I think it's just really important to understand that there will be differences between middle class and generational poverty, and that our values will be different. There is so much to learn from people who have come from generational poverty. Like I said, their generosity, their capacity to live in the moment, their immaterialism can be really important. For some people, I mean, for others, you might have different experiences, and I've had mixed experiences with different people. But ultimately, people are more important than possessions. However, buying very expensive possessions for people because you love them so much is a common trend. So, some of the impacts of living within generational poverty, and I have a big list there that you can read through, but not feeling like you're belonging in society is crucial. If you think about our churches, our restaurants, our pubs, our parks, our skate parks, our supermarkets, that everything is tailored towards the middle class. It is this constant, our schools, it's a constant feeling of not knowing where you fit, and not having the resources to carry out and to meet goals. I'm convinced there would be people from generational poverty who think, you know what, I just wish I could get a job. I didn't ask for this. I wish there was another way. But knowing what that other way is can be really, really challenging. So generational poverty it's a complicated state to be in. It renders those that are stuck within it a sense of feeling trapped without the tools to help them move out of poverty. Generational poverty interferes with middle class places like schools, like I mentioned, health services, Centrelink. In these settings, the values of middle class are generally modelled. So therefore, these rules that we think are just common sense, they just don't make sense to people from generational poverty. So in thinking about all of these things, and you might like to read up a little bit more about generational poverty, the author's name is Ruby Paines. She's the one that coined this phrase, and a lot of our content on this module is from Bridges Out of Poverty, which is a wonderful book. So I would like you to stop now and just have a reflection time. What things might be helpful for you when you are working with a mentee from a background of generational poverty? So what would be helpful to remember when working with them? So then on the second page, so after you finish that question, I want you to turn the page and you'll see that we have 4 scenarios written out. What I'd like you to do is go through and fill out those 4 scenarios. And then when we have our Zoom meeting, we will contribute to a discussion about those scenarios. So pause me now and go through the workbook on your own. I have a sense now, maybe after reading some of those scenarios, of real hopelessness. Like, this is a huge issue. I didn't realize it was so bad. What could I possibly do? If you have that sense, I hope that this next little section can impart some hope and some action points as to how you as a mentor can help. So there are 2 things that Ruby Paines talks about which can help a person to slowly and gradually move out of poverty. And they are education and relationships, but they're not in that order. So there are useful ways to help those affected with generational poverty. So genuine love, care and concern and prayer. So by sort of showing your genuine, unconditional, positive regard for these students and their families is one of the most useful things that you can do. If you expose these families or the children to new experiences, they might never have gone to the beach before. They might not have sat down and had a meal and realized how lovely it is before. They might not have gone for a bike ride before. So having the capacity to expose students to new and exciting experiences can really encourage them to see beyond their current, present, now moments. With plenty of appropriate and specific praise. So if you notice a student doing something that is maybe something you've been working on together. It might be not swearing in front of you. It might be covering their mouth when they burp. Something that in the long term is really going to help them in our middle class culture, giving them specific praise. The teaching, planning and steps, that's another very important thing. So within generational poverty, there isn't really the need to learn time management, sort of procedures and planning and budgeting and all that sort of thing. So within a task or an activity, teaching them how to plan something, how to next week, I'd like you to bring the paper plates for the experiment, that sort of thing, giving them a sense of responsibility, empowerment and choice. Teaching choices. All choices have consequences. So it's really important to somehow try to communicate that to your mentee. It might be you forgot the paper plate for the experiment. We're not going to be able to do it this week. So you're showing them that something they chose to do or to not do has meant there is an actual consequence for that and you can't do the experiment. And I know it doesn't sound like much, but small incremental things like this as just that drip, drip, drip that might cause change gradually and slowly over time. Realistic mutual exchange. So our government system has this idea at the moment of mutual exchange with welfare payments. However, the mutual exchange is unrealistic and sometimes unfair, and often like not ethical. So without mutual exchange, resentment can form on both sides. So if every single week you are the one that is bringing copious amounts of activities, you are the one bringing the craft, you are the one coming up with the ideas, over time, and your mentee will accept this, but over time, you might start getting this sense of resentment, start feeling like you're not engaging with your mentee as you once were. The chances are you're feeling like there's not mutual exchange. So it would be really important then just to think about some ways to be reciprocal. So I'll bring this, would you bring this? And then again, it makes you feel like you're involved in something as a partnership rather than I'm coming to fix you. You are the one that is the victim. I am the hero. Um, so I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind. A mentor can help assist a young person in poverty by helping them build resources. You'll see there's a little page there, resources inventory for students. So if you read through that, have a think about how you could possibly assist your mentee in your mentoring relationship, and definitely revisit this generational poverty material after you've met your mentee and you've had a bit of a relationship with them. You might see some things crossing over. So hopefully you feel like you are more equipped now to understand generational poverty, and hopefully we can have some really good discussions about this over Zoom. This is one of those modules that we will be doing primarily just one Zoom meeting about, because it is like a huge issue. But yeah, just finish off this on this last page, page 60. You'll see there's some final resources that you can read through, how you can help your mentee to sort of gain some resources. And I just want you to finish off that final question as to what things you've learned about generational poverty in this module. Thanks so much, guys, and I look forward to our Zoom meeting. Bye.